My name is Lauren, I'm 29, and I used to think the worst thing a person could do to you and a family was whisper, sabotage, and smile while they did it. I was wrong. The worst thing is when they hand you a plate of food at a celebration, look you in the eye, and you realize, too late, that they didn't come to make peace. They came to make you disappear. And the only reason I'm here to tell you this is because I noticed one small detail, and because someone else took the first bite that was meant for me. The night it happened was supposed to be simple. My husband, Ethan, was turning 31, and his parents insisted on throwing him a proper backyard party. Nothing extravagant, just the kind of warm summer evening that smells like grilled food and fresh grass, with string lights hung across the fence and music low enough that you could still hear people laugh. We hadn't had many uncomplicated nights lately. 2 months earlier, I'd stared at 2 pink lines and felt my entire life tilt, softly, like a door opening. We weren't trying. We weren't even tracking anything. We already had our son, Noah, who was 5 and convinced the world existed for toy cars and bedtime stories. I thought that chapter was, not closed, but settled. Then suddenly, there was another chapter being written under my ribs, quiet and invisible and already changing the way I looked at everything. Ethan was overjoyed in that stunned, breathless way men get when something huge happens and they don't know where to put their hands. He kept touching my shoulders, my hair, my back, like he needed to confirm I was real. We decided to tell everyone on his birthday. It felt right. It felt like a gift. It felt safe. If you'd asked me back then what I was afraid of, I would have said normal things: miscarriage, money, the chaos of 2 kids, whether I'd be a good mom again, whether I'd lose myself. I would not have said, Ethan's sister might try to kill me at a party. But if you want to understand how we got there, you need to know a little about Sabrina. Sabrina is Ethan's older sister by 2 years. She has the kind of beauty people call sharp, like it's edged. Her eyes are bright, her smile is perfect, and her voice is always just a touch too sweet, like honey left out in the sun. When I first met her, I tried. I really did. Back then, Ethan and I were still new, still in that dizzy stage where love makes you want to be liked by everyone connected to the person you're falling for. Sabrina didn't openly reject me. She didn't have to. She mastered something more subtle. A little comment here. A glance there. A pause just long enough to make you feel like you'd said something wrong. She'd bring up Ethan's ex-girlfriends the way some people bring up old songs, nostalgic, casual, as if it was harmless. Oh, remember Tessa, she'd say, laughing. She's doing amazing. She just bought a house. She always had such good taste. Or worse, she'd say it right to me, like I was included. You know, Ethan and Mia were so good together. She's the only one who really got him. He was happier then. At first, I tried to shrug it off. People say clumsy things. Families have dynamics. But it wasn't clumsy. It was consistent. It was intentional. It was like she was testing how much discomfort I would swallow without making a sound. When Ethan asked her to stop, she'd turn it around. Why are you so defensive, she'd say. I'm just talking. Lauren's not insecure, is she? And if I stayed quiet, she'd smirk like she'd won. If I spoke up, she'd act offended and wounded, like I'd attacked her for having memories. This was Sabrina's talent. She could throw a knife and make it look like you were the one bleeding inappropriately. When Ethan proposed, his parents were thrilled. His mom cried. His dad hugged him so hard Ethan actually grunted. Sabrina didn't do any of that. She sat there at the dinner table, face blank, and then stood up so abruptly her chair scraped. I need air, she said, and walked out. 10 minutes later Ethan's phone rang. He stepped outside and came back with that tight look on his face, the one he got when he was trying not to be angry at someone he loved. She's upset, he told me quietly. About what? I asked, though I already knew. She said she deserved to know first. That I should have told her privately, before everyone. It wasn't about the engagement. Not really. It was about the reality that I was becoming permanent. That I wasn't just a girlfriend she could pretend didn't matter. I was stepping into a role that made her feel less central. After that, she sent me a message. It wasn't openly threatening. That would have been too obvious. It was just weird. Be good to him, she wrote. He's always had me. Don't make him regret this. I stared at the screen, feeling my stomach tighten. I didn't reply. Not replying made her worse. Wedding planning became a battlefield of help and criticism. She insisted on being involved, but only so she could disapprove loudly. She mocked my choices, rolled her eyes at our colors, called my taste basic and my ideas cheap. At one point, while I was talking with Ethan's mom about centerpieces, Sabrina wandered over and said, "Wow. That's bold." I didn't realize we were doing a kid's birthday theme. Ethan's mom snapped, "Sabrina, stop," but Sabrina just smiled like she'd been teased, not corrected. I reached a point I didn't recognize in myself. One day, after another comment, another jab that landed in the same bruise, I lost it. I said, very calmly, "You're not invited." The room went silent. Sabrina looked at me like I'd slapped her. Then she did what she always did. She cried to her parents, she accused me of being controlling, she tried to get Ethan to handle me. And Ethan, bless him, did something he didn't always do back then. He chose me without hesitation. "If you don't apologize," he told her, "you're not coming. This isn't a debate." Sabrina apologized. It sounded sincere enough that his parents believed it. I didn't. But I let her come because I didn't want a war on our wedding day. I regret that. Not because she ruined the wedding, though she tried. Because it taught her that her behavior had no real consequences as long as she said the right words in the right tone. On our wedding day, our theme was blush pink and soft neutrals, light, warm, romantic. Sabrina showed up in a full-length black gown, with a dramatic black wrap like she was attending a funeral. When people asked why, she laughed and said, "Because I'm mourning. I'm losing my brother." She said it with a grin, but her eyes were cold. Ethan confronted her. She played the victim. His parents asked her to leave when she wouldn't stop making comments. And afterward, I did what I should have done from the beginning. I kept my distance. When Noah was born, I made it clear Sabrina wouldn't be alone with him. She pushed. She complained. Ethan's parents backed us up because by then even they were tired. For a while, Sabrina disappeared into her own life. She dated a guy named Caleb, had a pregnancy that ended in miscarriage, and for a brief moment she seemed softer, like grief had humbled her. Ethan and I allowed her back around us, carefully, because we didn't want to be cruel. That's the thing about decent people. We keep trying to believe someone can change, even when all the evidence says they only change when they need something. Sabrina married Caleb about a year after her miscarriage. She didn't invite us. When Ethan asked why, Sabrina told him, "I just can't trust Lauren not to make it about herself." Ethan laughed at first because it was so ridiculous, but Sabrina didn't laugh with him. She explained, straight-faced, that she was worried I would show up in black like she did, to upstage her. She admitted she did it on purpose, Ethan's dad told her when they found out. And now she's blaming you for what she already confessed. His parents refused to pay for her wedding if she excluded us. They refused to attend. Sabrina panicked. She cried. She begged. She apologized. And against my better judgment, I accepted it because I wanted peace. We went to her wedding. We smiled. We acted like normal family. 6 months later, Sabrina showed up at our doorstep claiming her marriage was already falling apart. She stayed with us for a few days, spilling her resentment in long, exhausting monologues. She blamed Caleb for everything, his mood, his job, their fertility issues. She never once wondered if she was part of the problem. Then, at a family lunch, she crossed a line so vicious I still hear the word sometimes when I'm trying to fall asleep. Ethan's mom was talking about a friend's divorce, and Sabrina suddenly asked Ethan, "Did you get a prenup with Lauren?" Ethan blinked. "No." Sabrina snorted. "That's brave. People cheat all the time." I felt my face heat. "What are you implying?" Sabrina turned her eyes on me like she'd been waiting. "I'm saying," she said, "it's weird you always bring extra clothes with you. Like you're going somewhere after the gym. Like you're meeting someone." Ethan's parents told her to stop. Sabrina kept going. Then she laughed, a quick, cruel sound, and said, "I mean, are we even sure Noah is Ethan's?" Everything in the room froze. Ethan's face went red, not with embarrassment but with something darker. He stood up and said words I didn't know a person could say to their sister. He told her she didn't deserve to be a mother, that her cruelty was why nothing in her life worked, and that if she ever spoke about our son like that again, she would never see us again. Sabrina cried, ran to the bathroom, and when she came out she looked at Caleb for support. Caleb sat there like a statue. That day ended in absolute silence. And after it, we went no contact. Blocked her. Deleted her. Removed her from our lives. For a year, it was peaceful. I started to relax. I started to think maybe that was the end of it. Then I found out I was pregnant again. And we decided to tell everyone at Ethan's birthday party. The party was at his parents' house. His dad, Robert, had cleaned the grill like it was a sacred object. His mom, Diane, had made her famous lemon cake. My parents were there. Friends from Ethan's work. A few neighbors. Noah ran around with a water gun, shrieking like the world had never hurt him. I remember standing near the patio, my hand resting on my stomach out of habit even though there was nothing to feel yet, and thinking, this is good. This is what life is supposed to be. Then I saw Sabrina. She appeared at the side gate like a ghost invited by mistake, dressed in a pale summer dress, hair curled, smile polished. For a second, I couldn't move. Ethan saw her too. His shoulders went rigid, and his hand found mine. Diane hurried toward us, face tight. "I didn't know she was coming," she whispered. "I swear. Someone must have told her." Robert's jaw worked like he was chewing anger. "We can ask her to leave," Diane said quickly. "We will. Just say the word." Ethan looked at me. I knew what he was weighing. It was his birthday. He didn't want a scene. He didn't want his parents' backyard to become another battlefield. So he nodded once, slow. "Let's get through the night," he murmured. "If she starts anything, she's gone." Sabrina came up and hugged him like they hadn't been at war for a year. "I missed you," she said loudly enough for people to hear. "I'm sorry about everything." Ethan didn't hug her back fully. He patted her shoulder like you would a coworker. Then he said, calmly, "You should apologize to Lauren." Sabrina turned to me and took my hands. Her palms were cold. "I'm sorry," she said. "I've been in therapy. I'm trying to be better. I was wrong." Her eyes were shiny. Her voice was soft. It was believable, if you didn't know her. I nodded because there were people watching. I didn't trust her, but I wasn't going to make a scene in front of our friends. For most of the evening, Sabrina did something that unsettled me more than her usual hostility. She acted normal. She laughed with my parents. Complimented Diane's decorations. Played with Noah for a few minutes like she was his favorite aunt. She floated through the party with that bright energy she only had when she wanted an audience. If I hadn't been watching so closely, I might have believed the therapy story. But I knew Sabrina. I knew the way she performed. And I kept waiting for the moment her smile would slip. When it was time for cake, Ethan tapped his glass and stood up. He gave a short speech, sweet, sincere, slightly awkward. He thanked his parents, his friends, his coworkers. Then he looked at me, his expression softening in a way that still makes my chest ache. And, he said, "I'm the luckiest guy in the world because I get to spend another year with my best friend." People clapped. Someone whistled. I felt my cheeks burn. Then Ethan squeezed my hand and said, "We actually have something to share." I took a breath. "We're expecting," I said. For a heartbeat there was silence, like the words needed time to land. Then the backyard erupted. Diane cried. My mom cried. People rushed toward me. Hands touched my shoulders, my arms, my hair, like love could be transferred through skin. Noah didn't fully understand, but he grinned because everyone else was happy, and he shouted, "I'm gonna be a big brother." I was laughing, half crying, dizzy with it. And then I saw Sabrina. She wasn't clapping. She was staring. Her face had gone still, like someone had taken a mask and snapped it in half. For 1 second, pure hatred flickered across her expression, raw and ugly. Then she turned and walked away. My stomach tightened. Ethan noticed too. His eyes followed her. But before he could move, another friend came up to hug him, and the moment got swallowed by noise. I told myself, she's jealous. She'll sulk. That's all. I didn't yet understand that jealousy can be more than an emotion. Sometimes it becomes a decision. Lunch was served buffet style. People lined up with plates, chatting. Diane tried to shoo me into a chair. Sit, she insisted. You're not lifting anything. Not today. My dad, who still treated me like I was made of glass, nodded aggressively. Sit. Let them bring you food. So I sat at the patio table with a glass of water, watching Ethan move through the crowd, smiling, accepting congratulations. I was relaxed, warm, safe. Then Sabrina appeared beside me holding a plate of food. She looked radiant, like she'd just had an idea that pleased her. Lauren, she said, loud and cheerful. I wanted to do something. Before I could speak, she set the plate in front of me. I'm so happy for you, she announced, voice bright enough to carry. And I know I've been awful, and I want to make it up to you. So I'm serving you. Pregnant ladies shouldn't have to wait. People nearby smiled at the gesture. Diane glanced over and looked briefly relieved, like this was proof her daughter had changed. Sabrina's eyes met mine. Something in them felt, sharpened. Thank you, I said automatically, because what else could I say? She leaned closer, lowering her voice. See, she murmured. I can be nice. Then she straightened and walked away. I looked down at the plate. It had grilled chicken, salad, rice, and on the side, curled pink shrimp. My throat tightened instantly. Everyone in Ethan's family knew I was severely allergic to shellfish. It wasn't acute, my stomach hurts, allergy. It was the kind where my lips swelled, my breathing narrowed, and I needed an EpiPen. We had talked about it for years. Diane never cooked shrimp when I was around. Ethan checked labels like it was his job. Sabrina knew. She had to know. My hands went cold. My heartbeat seemed to move into my ears. For a second I thought maybe it was an accident. Maybe someone else had made the plate and Sabrina had grabbed it without looking. But the shrimp were placed neatly on top, like a garnish. Like a statement. I pushed the plate away, stood up slowly, and forced my face to stay calm. I didn't want to panic. Not yet. I walked toward the buffet line planning to quietly make my own plate. As I moved, my brother-in-law, Sabrina's husband, stepped into my path. His name was Mark. Mark was not like Sabrina. He was quiet, almost gentle. He'd always seemed slightly exhausted, like he lived in a house where the air was heavy. He'd never been cruel to me. Sometimes I thought he was embarrassed by his wife. He smiled awkwardly. Congrats, he said. That's amazing. Thank you, I said, my voice thin. Mark glanced at my hands. Are you okay? You look. I'm fine, I said quickly. Then, because I couldn't keep it inside, I nodded back toward the patio table. Sabrina brought me a plate. She put shrimp on it. I'm allergic. Mark frowned, confused. She did? I nodded. Maybe it was a mistake. But I'm not eating it. Mark's expression shifted. Something dark passed through his eyes, so fast I almost missed it. Then he sighed and said, Don't worry. I'll eat it. I like shrimp. Go get something else. No, I started, instinctively. You don't have to. It's fine, he insisted, already reaching for the plate I'd carried over without thinking. Waste is waste. And she'll get mad if it goes untouched. That last part hit me like a warning bell. Because it was true. Sabrina hated being ignored. She hated her efforts, good or bad, being dismissed. Mark took the plate with a small, weary smile, as if he was saving me from an argument. I hesitated. In my head, everything was flashing: shrimp allergy, Sabrina's eyes, the coldness of her hands, the way she'd said, "See? I can be nice." But the party was loud. People were laughing. Mark looked normal. He looked harmless. And my brain did what brains sometimes do when reality becomes too sharp. It softened the edges. It told me I was overreacting. So I let him take it. I turned and went to make myself another plate. And 5 minutes later, Mark collapsed. It started with him coughing, hard, violent coughs that didn't sound like choking on food. Then he stood up too fast, his chair scraping, and grabbed the table. Someone laughed nervously, like it was a joke. "Mark?" Diane called. Mark's eyes were wide, panicked. His face had gone pale. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a wet, strangled sound. Then he vomited. People screamed and jumped back. Plates clattered. A glass shattered on the patio stones. Ethan was already moving. He pushed through the crowd to Mark, grabbing his shoulders. Hey, what's wrong?" Mark pointed weakly at his throat, gasping. And then he went down. He hit the ground hard, his body jerking once before going frighteningly still. For a second the entire backyard went silent in the way a room does when the air gets sucked out. Then chaos exploded. Someone called 911. Diane dropped to her knees beside him, trembling. Robert's face was gray. People backed away, whispering. I stood frozen, my plate in my hands, unable to breathe. Because I knew. I knew with a clarity so sharp it felt like pain. That was my plate. That was meant for me. My vision narrowed. The edges of the world blurred. I looked up and saw Sabrina across the yard. She wasn't crying. She was watching. And when her eyes met mine, she didn't look shocked. She looked furious. As if the wrong person had fallen. The ambulance arrived fast, lights washing the backyard in red and blue. Paramedics worked on Mark right there, in front of everyone, their movements quick and practiced, their voices calm in a way that made it more terrifying. They loaded him onto a stretcher and rushed him out. Sabrina screamed and clung to him, suddenly hysterical, suddenly the devoted wife. But I watched her face when she thought no one was looking. And I saw something else underneath the panic. Calculation. Ethan turned toward her, rage written all over him. What the hell happened? He demanded. What did he eat? Sabrina's eyes flicked to the patio table, where the now empty plate sat, smeared with sauce and shrimp tails. He was just eating, she sobbed. I don't know. Ethan's mom grabbed his arm. Not now, Diane whispered. We have to get to the hospital. Everyone followed in pieces, some driving, some calling, some staying behind. I didn't move. Ethan came to me, his hand on my shoulder. Lauren, he said, voice tight. Are you okay? You're shaking. I couldn't speak. If I opened my mouth, I was afraid a scream would come out. So I nodded. Ethan kissed my forehead quickly. Stay with Mom and Dad, he said. I'll go. He ran. And I was left standing in a backyard full of half-eaten food and scattered chairs, trying to keep my face calm while my mind screamed one sentence over and over. She tried to poison me. At the hospital, doctors stabilized Mark. They ran tests. They asked what he ate, what he drank, if anyone else felt sick. Ethan's parents were in shock. They kept saying, How? How could this happen? Sabrina cried dramatically, holding Mark's hand like she was in a movie. I sat in a plastic waiting room chair and stared at my shoes, feeling like the floor had vanished. Eventually, a doctor pulled Ethan aside and spoke quietly. Ethan came back with his face drained of color. They think it was poisoning, he said hoarsely. Diane made a sound like she'd been punched. Robert swore under his breath. Sabrina gasped and covered her mouth. Poisoning, she cried. Who would do that? I felt my stomach turn. Because if it was poisoning, that meant the shrimp weren't the only problem. It meant something had been added to that plate. Something meant to hurt, or kill. And that plate had been placed in front of me. I looked at Ethan. I wanted to tell him. I needed to tell him. But my throat locked. Fear is strange. It doesn't always make you brave. Sometimes it makes you small. I was afraid he wouldn't believe me. I was afraid saying it out loud would make it real. I was afraid of what Sabrina would do if she knew I was accusing her. So I stayed silent for a few hours, while the world spun. The police arrived not long after. They asked questions. They collected information. They asked if anyone saw something unusual. Sabrina cried harder, insisting she had no enemies, that Mark had no enemies, that it must be a mistake. Ethan's parents looked like they were about to break. And I sat there thinking of one thing. Cameras. Diane and Robert had security cameras all around their property. Robert installed them himself, proud of it. He checked them like a hobby. If Sabrina had brought that plate to me, there would be footage. Proof. A way to speak without my voice. That night, Diane and Robert insisted we all go back to their house. They were terrified to be alone. They were shaking like people who had just watched their world fracture. Ethan stayed at the hospital with Mark for a while. My parents came to our house to get Noah, who had no idea what had happened. He thought the party ended early because adults were boring. When Ethan returned home after midnight, his face was drawn, his eyes red with exhaustion. We sat at our kitchen table, the house quiet, and I finally told him. I told him about the plate. About the shrimp. About Mark taking it from me. And about the sick certainty in my chest that Sabrina hadn't made a mistake. Ethan stared at me as if I'd spoken another language. What? He whispered. I didn't eat it, I said, voice shaking. I was going to get another plate because, the shrimp. And Mark took it. He ate it. Ethan, it was meant for me. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. Diane started crying all over again, a low, broken sound. Robert stood up so fast his chair almost fell. We're checking the cameras, he said, voice like steel. We opened his phone and pulled up the security app. My heart hammered so hard I thought I would vomit. We rewound. We watched the backyard from the angle near the patio. And there it was. Sabrina walking toward me, smiling, holding a plate. Sabrina handing it to me. Sabrina leaning in. Sabrina walking away. Then me standing up, carrying the plate toward the buffet line. Mark stepping in. Mark taking the plate. Mark going back to the table. 5 minutes later. Mark collapsing. The footage wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was undeniable. Ethan's face turned something I'd never seen before, an expression beyond anger, beyond betrayal, into something colder. He looked at his parents. Call the police, he said. Now. The next hours moved like a nightmare you can't wake from. The police returned. Robert showed them the footage. I gave a statement with my voice barely steady. They asked about my allergy. I explained it, and watched the officer's eyes narrow with something like disgust. They asked if Sabrina knew. Yes, Diane whispered, devastated. Everyone knows. By dawn, the police had enough to treat Sabrina as a suspect. They went to the hospital, spoke to Mark when he was coherent enough, and then they spoke to Sabrina. Sabrina didn't keep her calm for long. When confronted with the footage, she broke. Not in a quiet, ashamed way. In a hysterical, furious way, sobbing, shaking, insisting it wasn't that serious, insisting she didn't mean to hurt the baby, insisting she only wanted to teach me a lesson. A lesson. As if my life was a classroom and she was entitled to be the teacher. They arrested her in the hospital hallway. Ethan wasn't there to see it, he was with Mark, but his parents were. Diane later told me Sabrina screamed Ethan's name like he could rescue her. He didn't. Mark survived. The doctor said the amount of toxin wasn't enough to kill an adult quickly, but it was enough to cause severe illness, possibly organ damage if untreated. He was lucky. That word got used a lot. Lucky. I kept thinking, if I had eaten it, would my baby have survived? Would I? Mark recovered slowly over the next weeks. Ethan visited him often, not because Mark was family by blood, but because Mark was the only person in this mess who hadn't chosen cruelty. When Mark was strong enough, he made a choice that stunned no one and yet still felt tragic. He pressed charges. And he filed for divorce. Sabrina called Diane and Robert from jail, crying, begging, promising she was pregnant. That part was true, she was. She tried to use it like a shield. You can't let your grandchild be born without a mother, she sobbed. Robert's voice, when he told Ethan later what he said to her, was flat. We should have stopped protecting you years ago, he told her. Maybe then you wouldn't be here. Sabrina blamed me anyway. She insisted it was my fault because I gave the plate to Mark. As if I had poured poison on his food with my own hands. As if my only crime was not eating what she served me. The court didn't care about her excuses. The evidence was clear: tampering, intent to harm, endangering life. Her lawyers tried to argue diminished intent, hormones, jealousy, mental health. But there was footage. There were statements. There were medical reports. And there was the simple, horrifying fact that she had chosen to mix poison into food at a family gathering. In the end, Sabrina was sentenced to prison. Not for a lifetime. Not for decades. But long enough that she would miss years of life, the kind of years you never get back. Mark's divorce went through. His marriage ended in the same way her attempt did, with consequences she couldn't talk her way out of. I didn't attend the court hearings. I couldn't. Every time I tried to picture Sabrina in a courtroom, I saw her face in the backyard, the moment after we announced our pregnancy, when her mask slipped and her eyes turned hateful. I didn't want that image deeper in my mind. Instead, I focused on staying healthy. My doctor recommended extra monitoring because stress during pregnancy can do things people don't talk about in casual conversation. I went for ultrasounds every 2 weeks, listening to the steady heartbeat that sounded like a small drum insisting on life. My parents urged therapy. Ethan agreed immediately. He sat with me during some sessions, his hand on my knee, his jaw tight with guilt even though none of this was his fault. The strangest consequence was the simplest one. I became afraid to eat. Not just at parties. Everywhere. Restaurants. Friends' houses. Even meals Diane cooked, and Diane was a woman who loved me fiercely. My brain knew the danger was gone. My body didn't. Food stopped feeling like comfort. It became a question. Who touched this? What's in it? Could something be hiding? It was irrational. It was exhausting. But trauma doesn't ask permission before it rewires you. Slowly, with therapy and time, it softened. Not fully. Not yet. But enough that I could breathe again. 8 months after the party, I gave birth to a baby girl. We named her Elena. She came into the world red-faced and furious, like she had been interrupted. When the nurse placed her on my chest, her tiny fingers curled around mine with surprising strength. Ethan cried. Quietly at first, then openly, his shoulders shaking with relief. Noah adored her instantly. He stood on his tiptoes to kiss her forehead and whispered, "I'll protect you." Hearing him say that broke something in me and healed something else at the same time. We later told Noah, in age-appropriate words, that his aunt was not safe, that she had done something very wrong, and that she would not be part of our lives. He didn't understand everything. But he understood the part that mattered. That we keep distance from people who hurt us. That love doesn't mean access. That family doesn't mean immunity. Mark stayed in contact with us. Not constantly, not dramatically, just enough that we knew he was okay. He told me once, months later, "I'm sorry I didn't see who she was earlier." I said, "I'm sorry you paid the price for her choice." He shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "You didn't poison me. She did." That sentence, simple as it was, freed me from a chain I'd been dragging. Because for a long time, I had replayed that moment again and again, the plate in my hands, the hesitation, the second where I could have thrown it away. But you can't live your life responsible for someone else's evil. You can only learn to recognize it, and refuse to let it sit at your table again. People ask me sometimes if I feel guilty. Not for Sabrina. For the child she was carrying. For the mess her parents had to endure. For the family that shattered. And I do feel sadness, yes. Because it's tragic when someone destroys themselves from the inside out and takes pieces of others with them. But guilt? No. Because guilt implies I did something wrong by being loved, by building a life, by having a family, by existing in a way Sabrina couldn't control. What happened wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't drama. It was a crime. And the scariest part is not that it happened. The scariest part is how easily it could have happened without anyone noticing. If I hadn't seen the shrimp. If Mark hadn't taken the plate. If there hadn't been cameras. If everyone had wanted to believe her performance. Sometimes I lie awake and think of that alternate reality, one where I take the first bite, my throat tightens, my vision narrows, and my son grows up without me, my daughter never born. And then I look at Elena sleeping, her tiny chest rising and falling, and Noah sprawled across his bed like he owns the world, and Ethan in the doorway watching us like he's afraid to blink. And I remind myself of something I learned the hard way. Some people don't just cross boundaries. They cross lines that should never be crossed. And when they do, the most loving thing you can do, for yourself, for your children, for your future, is to shut the door and let consequences do what kindness could not. Because some stories don't end with apologies. They end with understanding. If this story felt familiar, you're not alone. Thank you for listening. This was Block Tales.